Welcome to another spine-chilling tale from Sleep Theories. Before we dive into tonight's story about streets that vanish and realities that shift, I want to give a special thanks to Meditate, Create and Valensrocks for suggesting this incredible concept. Your ideas fuel these stories, so please keep those video suggestions coming in the comments below. And if you enjoy these mysterious tales that blur the line between nightmare and reality, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that will keep you awake long into the night. Now, settle in and prepare yourself for a journey into a world where familiar places become foreign, where your own memories might be the only proof of what once was real. The city looks different at 3 a.m. Streetlights cast long shadows between buildings, and the usual chaos of traffic gives way to an almost sacred quiet. I've been driving rideshare for 4 years now, working the night shift because the money's better and honestly I prefer the solitude. There's something honest about the night. People are either going somewhere important or running from something they'd rather forget. My phone buzzed with a new ride request just as I finished dropping off a group of college kids downtown. The pickup was on Maple Avenue, and the destination showed as 1247 Warren Street. I knew the area well, had driven through it hundreds of times. Warren Street ran parallel to the University District, lined with old brownstones that had been converted into apartments for students and young professionals. The passenger was already waiting outside when I pulled up. Middle-aged woman with greying hair clutching a small overnight bag. She looked tired in that bone-deep way that comes from more than just staying up late. "You're going to Warren Street," I confirmed as she settled into the back seat. "Yes, 1247. Thank you for coming so quickly." Her voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. I've been visiting my sister there for years, but tonight, I'm not sure why, but I kept getting turned around trying to find it myself. I pulled away from the curb and headed toward the familiar route. The GPS showed a straight shot, down Maple, left on University, then right onto Warren Street. Simple enough. I'd probably driven that exact route 50 times this year alone. "How long has your sister lived there?" I asked, making conversation to fill the comfortable silence. "Oh, about 15 years now. Same apartment the whole time. She's always joking about how she'll never move because she finally memorized her address." The woman laughed softly. "Though between you and me, the neighbourhood has changed quite a bit. Not necessarily for the worse, just different." We made the left onto University Avenue, passing the late-night coffee shop that catered to cramming students and the 24-hour laundromat where I'd seen the same homeless man sleeping in the doorway for the past 2 years. Everything looked normal, exactly as it should. Then I made the right turn where Warren Street should have been. The street sign read Miller Avenue in crisp official lettering. Not a makeshift replacement or a temporary sign. This looked like it had been there for decades. The metal showed the right amount of weathering, the same faded green paint as all the other street signs in the district. I slowed the car, checking my GPS. The blue line still showed us travelling on Warren Street, but the street sign clearly said Miller Avenue. I glanced in my rearview mirror at my passenger, who was looking out the window with a puzzled expression. "This is strange," she murmured. "This doesn't look quite right." I pulled over and studied the buildings. They were similar to what I remembered. The same general style of architecture, the same height and spacing. But the details were wrong. The corner building had been painted a warm terracotta colour in my memory. Now it was a muted sage green. The small community garden that used to occupy the lot between 2 apartment buildings had been replaced by a pocket park with different trees, different layout, different everything. "The address should be right down there," I said, pointing toward where the 1200 block should have been. But even the building numbers seemed off somehow. My passenger was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the street. "This is Miller Avenue," she said finally. "But I could have sworn. I've been coming here for 15 years. I know this was Warren Street last week." We drove slowly down the block looking for 1247. We found it, a narrow brownstone wedged between 2 larger buildings with the right number painted on the door. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole scene. Like looking at a photograph where someone had digitally altered small details. "This is it," my passenger said as we pulled up to the address. But she didn't sound certain. She sat in the car for several more seconds studying the building. The door used to be blue. I'm sure it was blue last time I was here. The door was dark green with paint that looked like it had been that colour for years. She paid me through the app and got out, but hesitated on the sidewalk. Driver, you've been through this area before, right? Have you ever heard of Warren Street? I nodded slowly. I thought I had. I could have sworn this was Warren Street. So did I. She walked toward the building, then turned back one more time. Maybe we're both just tired. Maybe I've been calling it the wrong name all these years. But as I drove away, checking my mirrors to make sure I was heading in the right direction, I knew she was wrong. I had definitely driven down Warren Street before, many times, and it had definitely been Warren Street, not Miller Avenue. I made a mental note to check my paper map when I got home. I kept an old road atlas in my glove compartment, one of those habits left over from before GPS became reliable. But first, I had 3 more rides to finish before my shift ended. The rest of the night passed normally, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. It was like when you rearrange furniture in a room you've lived in for years. Everything is technically correct, but your body keeps expecting things to be in the wrong places. By the time I got home at dawn, I'd almost convinced myself it was just fatigue. Night shift work can play tricks on your mind, especially after working 6 straight days. Maybe I had been misremembering the street name. Maybe my passenger had too. Stranger coincidences had happened. But as I sat in my driveway watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, one thought kept nagging at me. If it had always been Miller Avenue, why did my GPS still think we had been travelling on Warren Street? I slept until 3 in the afternoon, which was normal for my schedule, but the dreams were anything but normal. All night long, I kept dreaming about driving down familiar streets that led to places I'd never seen before. In one dream, I was trying to get home, but every turn led to a different version of my neighbourhood. Same houses, different colours, different numbers, different trees. When I finally dragged myself out of bed and made coffee, the first thing I did was dig through my glove compartment for my paper road atlas. It was a 2019 edition, still relatively new, with detailed street maps of the entire metropolitan area. I flipped to page 47, the section that covered the University District. My finger traced down University Avenue to the intersection where I had made the right turn the night before. Warren Street, clear as day, printed in the same font as every other street name on the map. Not Miller Avenue, Warren Street, exactly where I remembered it being. I stared at the map for several minutes, then checked the GPS on my phone. When I searched for Warren Street in that area, it came up with no results. When I searched for Miller Avenue, it showed exactly the route I had driven the night before. Something cold settled in my stomach. I grabbed my laptop and started searching online for any information about street name changes in the University District. The city's official record showed that Miller Avenue had been established in 1987 and had never been renamed. There was no mention of Warren Street anywhere in the municipal database. On impulse, I created a post on the city's community forum. Does anyone remember Warren Street in the University District? It used to run parallel to the campus, between University Avenue and Oak Street. Now it's called Miller Avenue, and I can't find any record of when the name was changed. I included a photo of my paper map showing Warren Street clearly labelled. The first few responses came within an hour. Yeah, I remember Warren Street. I used to live there in 2018. When did they change it? Warren Street! My ex-boyfriend lived on that street. I always thought it was a weird coincidence because his last name was Warren. I delivered pizza in that area for 3 years. Definitely remember Warren Street. Strange that there's no record of the name change. But then other responses started coming in. Are you guys serious? That's been Miller Avenue for as long as I can remember, and I've lived here for 30 years. This is obviously fake. Why would you create a fake street name and Photoshop it onto a map? Miller Avenue was named after the Miller family who donated the land to the city in 1887. It's never been called anything else. The thread quickly devolved into arguments between people who insisted they remembered Warren Street and people who were equally certain it had always been Miller Avenue. By evening, the tone had turned ugly, with accusations of lying and attention-seeking behaviour. I went to bed that night feeling unsettled but oddly vindicated. At least I wasn't the only one who remembered Warren Street. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Perhaps the city had renamed it recently and hadn't updated all their records yet. When I woke up the next afternoon, I checked the forum thread immediately. The post was gone. Not deleted, with a note saying it had been removed for violating community guidelines. Completely gone, as if it had never existed. My post history showed no record of ever creating it. More disturbing, when I checked my paper map again, page 47 now showed Miller Avenue where Warren Street had been printed the day before. The font was identical to all the other street names, and the paper showed no signs of alteration. It looked exactly like it had been printed that way originally. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the map, trying to convince myself that I had misremembered what I had seen. But I distinctly recalled running my finger along the printed words Warren Street, less than 24 hours earlier. I grabbed my phone and tried searching online for any cached versions of my forum post, any screenshots, any evidence that it had ever existed. I found nothing. That night, instead of starting my usual rideshare shift, I drove back to Miller Avenue. I parked across the street from where I had dropped off my passenger and studied the buildings more carefully. The corner building was definitely sage green, and the paint job looked professional and weathered, but something about the colour seemed wrong to my eyes, like seeing a familiar person wearing an outfit that doesn't quite suit them. The pocket park was well established, with mature trees and worn paths that suggested it had been there for years. I walked through the small park looking for any signs of recent construction or landscaping changes. The trees were all at least 10 years old, maybe more. The memorial plaque near the entrance was dated 2009, dedicating the space to the Miller Avenue Community Garden Preservation Society. But I could swear I remembered a different garden in this exact spot. A smaller space with raised vegetable beds and a chain-link fence, not this manicured little park with its neat flower borders and decorative benches. As I stood there in the evening light, a woman walked by, walking her dog. She was middle-aged, looked like she lived in the neighbourhood. "Excuse me," I called out. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm trying to settle a bet with a friend. Do you happen to know if this street used to be called something else?" She stopped and looked at me suspiciously. "Miller Avenue?" "No, it's always been Miller Avenue. My grandmother lived on this street in the 1940s. Family's been here for generations." "What about this park? Has it always been here?" Now she looked at me like I might be mentally unstable. "The Miller Community Park? Of course it's always been here. Are you from the area?" "I thought I was," I said. "Thanks anyway." As I walked back to my car, I noticed something that made me freeze in place. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was a man in a dark jacket who seemed to be watching me. When I looked directly at him, he turned away and started walking in the opposite direction. Maybe it was paranoia, but something about his posture had suggested he'd been observing me for a while. I got in my car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror more frequently than usual. I didn't see the man again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my questions about Warren Street had attracted unwanted attention. That night I started keeping a notebook by my bed. I wrote down everything I could remember about Warren Street, the colour of buildings, the storefronts, the layout of the street. If my own maps couldn't be trusted to stay consistent, at least I could document what I remembered while the memories were still clear. I had no way of knowing it then, but that notebook would become my only anchor to reality in the days to come. 3 days later, I decided to do a systematic survey of the university district. If Warren Street could disappear and be replaced by Miller Avenue, what else might have changed? I armed myself with my notebook and drove to the area in the late afternoon when the lighting was good for observation. I started at the corner of University and Miller, the intersection I thought I knew so well. The first thing I noticed was the mural on the side wall of the Riverside Grocery Building. I had admired that mural dozens of times while waiting at the traffic light. It depicted a World War II soldier in uniform saluting against a backdrop of an American flag. The plaque at the bottom read, "In honour of local veterans, painted by Lincoln High School Art Class 2017. But the face was wrong. I sat in my parked car, staring at the mural, trying to understand what I was seeing. The soldier's features were different. Broader jaw, different nose, darker hair. The uniform was the same, the pose identical, but it was definitely not the same face I remembered. The original soldier had looked younger, with lighter hair and a more angular face. I got out and walked closer to examine the plaque. The bronze was weathered in a way that suggested it had been there for years. There was no sign of the recent replacement or alteration. According to this plaque, Lincoln High School's art class had painted this specific mural in 2017, and I was sure I had been seeing it regularly since at least 2019. I took several photos of the mural and made detailed notes about the differences I remembered. The next stop was Murphy's Diner, 3 blocks down Miller Avenue. I had eaten there probably 20 times over the past 2 years. Decent coffee, good breakfast, friendly staff who knew the night shift workers in the area. The neon sign in the window had always been slightly crooked, and the owner, an elderly man named Murphy, always wore the same green apron. But Murphy's Diner was gone. In its place stood Riverside Pharmacy, with a crisp new sign and a bright sterile interior visible through large windows. The building was the same shape and size, but everything else had changed. Where Murphy's had been painted a warm yellow, the pharmacy was stark white. Where there had been a small parking lot, there was now a landscaped area with modern benches. I went inside, hoping to find someone who could tell me about the previous business. "Excuse me," I said to the pharmacist, a woman in her 40s with greying hair. "I'm new to the area, and I was wondering what used to be in this building before the pharmacy." She looked puzzled. "This has always been Riverside Pharmacy. My family has owned this location for 12 years. No other business before that. Well, my husband's father ran it before us, but it's been a pharmacy for at least 20 years. Maybe longer. We have records going back to 1998. I thanked her and left, my hands shaking slightly as I made notes. In my notebook, I wrote down everything I could remember about Murphy's Diner. The layout, the menu, the colour of the booths, the way Murphy always hummed while he cooked. The pattern continued throughout the afternoon. The barbershop I remembered had been replaced by a coffee shop that looked like it had been there for years. A vacant lot where I was sure there had been a small apartment building now contained a well-established community garden with mature plants. Most disturbing, the people I talked to didn't just disagree with my memories. They seemed genuinely confused by my questions, as if I was asking about places that had never existed. By late afternoon, I had documented 7 significant discrepancies between what I remembered and what currently existed. In each case, the current version looked authentic and established. Not like recent changes or replacements. I decided to try a different approach. There was a used bookstore on Oak Street that specialised in local history and ephemera. If changes had been made to the neighbourhood, there might be some record of what had been there before. Paperback Paradise was exactly as I remembered it. Dusty, cramped, with towers of books reaching toward the ceiling, and narrow aisles that barely allowed one person to pass. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was sorting through a box of old magazines behind the counter. "I'm looking for anything about the University District," I told her. "Old photos, newspapers, anything that might show what the neighbourhood looked like in the past few years. Any particular time period? Actually, I'm most interested in very recent history, like 2019 to now. I'm trying to track some changes in the area." She directed me to a section near the back where she kept local newspapers and university publications. I spent an hour going through issues of the student newspaper, looking for any mention of Murphy's Diner, Warren Street, or the other places I remembered. In a stack of community newsletters from 2020, I found something that made my pulse quicken. There was a small classified ad that read, "Murphy's Diner closing after 15 years. Thanks to all our loyal customers. Final day, March 15th, 2020. I stared at the ad, reading it over and over. Here was proof that Murphy's Diner had existed, that I wasn't imagining things. I looked around for Mrs. Henderson to ask about purchasing the newsletter, but she'd stepped away from the counter. While I waited for her to return, I continued searching through the papers. In a university newsletter from 2019, I found a small article about a community art project that mentioned the Warren Street Mural Renovation Project. The article was brief, but it clearly referred to Warren Street as a real place. I gathered both publications and brought them to the counter, but Mrs. Henderson was still nowhere to be seen. After waiting for several minutes, I heard voices coming from the back room. Mrs. Henderson talking to someone in low, urgent tones. "I'll be right with you," she called out. But something about her tone had changed. When she emerged from the back room a few minutes later, she looked flustered and avoided making eye contact. "I'm sorry, but we're closing early today," she said. "Family emergency." "I just wanted to buy these 2 newsletters," I said, holding up the publications with the Murphy's Diner ad and the Warren Street reference. She glanced at the papers in my hand and her expression became even more uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but those items aren't for sale. They're part of a private collection that was brought in by mistake." "But they were in the public section." "Please leave," she said firmly. "We're closed." I had no choice but to put the newsletters back and leave the store. As I walked to my car, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with 2 people inside. The passenger seemed to be watching the bookstore. I drove around the block and parked where I could observe paperback paradise without being obvious about it. Within 10 minutes, I saw Mrs. Henderson lock up the store and flip the sign to closed. The dark sedan pulled away from the curb and followed her as she walked to her own car. That night I tried calling the bookstore. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. When I drove by the next afternoon, there was a sign in the window. "Closed due to illness. Reopening date TBD." I never saw those newsletters again. And when the store reopened 2 weeks later, Mrs. Henderson claimed to have no memory of our conversation about local history publications. But I had seen them. The Murphy's Diner ad and the Warren Street reference had been real, printed in black and white. Someone was making sure that evidence of the old neighbourhood disappeared as quickly as I found it. That night, I started taking precautions. I made copies of everything I wrote in my notebook and hid them in different locations around my apartment. If my written records could somehow be altered like the maps had been, I wanted to make sure I had backups. I also started taking photos of everything. Street signs, buildings, murals, storefronts. If reality was being edited somehow, maybe photographs would provide a more permanent record. I had no idea how naive that hope was. After the incident at Paperback Paradise, I realised I needed to be more careful about how I investigated the changes in the neighbourhood. If someone was monitoring people who asked too many questions about Warren Street, I couldn't just walk around interviewing random strangers. Instead, I decided to focus my search online. The internet was vast and decentralised. Surely it would be harder to scrub every reference to places and events that had apparently been erased from physical reality. I started with basic searches: Warren Street University District, Murphy's Diner, street name changes. Most of the results were irrelevant, but I found a few forum posts and social media comments that seemed promising. However, when I tried to access them, I kept getting page not found errors, or finding that the posts had been deleted. It was frustrating, but I kept trying different search terms and looking deeper into cached results. After several hours of this tedious work, I found something interesting. Buried in the comments section of a paranormal blog was a cryptic post from someone with the username Reality Archivist. For those experiencing geographical discontinuities, timeline displacement, or collective memory revision events, there is a place to document and discuss these phenomena safely. Search for Forgotten Archive on Tor. Use standard precautions. I had heard of Tor, the anonymizing browser used to access hidden parts of the internet. I had never needed it before, but the idea of geographical discontinuities was too close to my own experience to ignore. It took me a few hours to figure out how to install and configure Tor properly, and another hour to find the Forgotten Archive forum. When I finally accessed it, I found a simple, text-based discussion board with several dozen active threads. The forum's description read, "A space for documenting and discussing places, events, and people that no longer exist. Share your memories, compare experiences, and preserve what has been forgotten. Anonymity required. Verification encouraged." I spent the next several hours reading through posts, and what I found there was both reassuring and terrifying. There were dozens of people from around the world reporting experiences similar to mine. A woman in Portland described how her neighbourhood pizza place had been replaced by a bank, with everyone insisting the bank had always been there. A man in Chicago wrote about a park that had somehow become a shopping centre overnight, complete with businesses that had apparently been operating there for years. But the post that really caught my attention was from someone called Phase Walker. Phoenix residents, has anyone noticed changes in the Midtown district? Specifically, I'm looking for anyone who remembers Central Avenue, between 7th and 15th Streets, being completely different last month. Buildings are the same height and general style, but wrong colours, wrong businesses, wrong details. Also, does anyone remember the Morrison building having a different architectural style? The post had been made 3 weeks earlier and had several responses. People confirmed similar experiences in Phoenix, but what was most interesting were the details Phase Walker provided in follow-up comments. The changes happened all at once, sometime between Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. I noticed a bright flash in the sky around 3:30 a.m. Tuesday, followed by a low rumbling sound. By Wednesday, the entire 6-block area had these subtle but consistent differences. The pattern seems to be systematic, like someone ran a find and replace function on reality. Same overall structure, but with details swapped out for alternatives that look equally real and established. I've been tracking the phenomenon for 8 months now. It's happened 3 times in Phoenix, always preceded by the same atmospheric disturbance. Always between 3 and 4 a.m. Always affecting a specific geographic area in a grid pattern. I created an account with the username Night Driver and posted my own experience. University District, major metropolitan area, keeping location vague for now. Warren Street became Miller Avenue overnight. All records changed to match new reality. Physical evidence disappears when discovered. People who remember the old version seem to attract attention from unknown parties. Anyone else experience active suppression of investigation? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, I had a dozen replies from people who had experienced similar reality shifts. More importantly, 3 people had direct messages for me, including one from Phase Walker. Check your private messages, the forum's built-in system informed me. PMS are automatically encrypted and delete after 48 hours. Phase Walker's message was brief but specific. Your pattern matches Phoenix event number 3. Grid-based replacement, systematic documentation destruction, observer monitoring, need to talk. Same time tomorrow in encrypted chat room number 7734. The second message was from someone called Temporal Witness. If you're experiencing active suppression, you're past the point of casual observation. They know you remember. Be careful what you search for online from now on. The third was from Grid Theory. The University District changes you describe match predicted coordinates from the projection model. If you're willing to help with documentation, there may be a way to predict the next event. I spent the rest of the night reading everything I could find on the forum. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what I was experiencing wasn't unique or isolated. There was a pattern here, a systematic process of reality alteration that was affecting people around the world. The forum users had developed their own terminology and theories. Reality shifts, sudden changes to physical locations that appeared to have always been that way, memory islands. People who retained memories of the pre-shift reality, evidence decay, the tendency for physical proof of old reality to disappear or be altered, grid events, reality shifts that followed systematic patterns across urban areas, adjustment teams, mysterious groups that seemed to monitor and suppress investigation. The most disturbing thread was titled Disappeared Observers. It contained reports of people who had been actively investigating reality shifts and had subsequently vanished entirely. In some cases, family members and friends claimed no memory of the missing person ever existing. One post from Archive Keeper read, "Toronto Mapper has been offline for 3 weeks. Checked with contacts in the city. No record of anyone by his real name at his last known address. Employer claims no one by that name ever worked there. His entire identity appears to have been edited out of the system." I closed the laptop and sat in my dark living room trying to process what I had learned. If the forum users were right, I wasn't just dealing with some local phenomenon or personal delusion. I was apparently part of a global pattern of reality manipulation that someone was going to great lengths to hide. And if the forum was correct about adjustment teams and people who asked too many questions, I was already in more danger than I had realised. The next evening I logged into encrypted chat room number 7734 to meet Phase Walker. What I learned there would change everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality itself. The encrypted chat with Phasewalker was scheduled for 11 p.m, but I logged in an hour early to get familiar with the interface. The chat room was completely anonymous. No usernames displayed, just randomised ED numbers that changed every few minutes. At exactly 11 p.m, a message appeared. Night driver, confirm you're here by describing the colour of the building that's wrong on your Miller Avenue. I typed back, sage green corner building, should be terracotta. Confirmed. I'm the Phoenix contact. Before we start, have you noticed anyone watching you since you began investigating? I thought about the man by the lamppost outside Miller Avenue, and the sedan that had followed Mrs. Henderson from the bookstore. Maybe a few incidents that seemed like surveillance. Then we need to cover safety protocols first. Are you posting from your home? Yes. Bad idea. From now on, only access the forum and chats from public Wi-Fi, preferably locations you can leave quickly, never the same place twice. Assume your home internet is monitored if you've been flagged as an observer. This was getting into territory that felt paranoid, but given everything I had experienced, I decided to take the advice seriously. Flagged by who? We call them adjustment teams, but we don't know exactly who they work for. Government black project, private corporation, something else. The source doesn't matter as much as the pattern. They monitor for people who remember pre-shift reality and document evidence. At first they just clean up loose ends, remove evidence, discredit witnesses. But if someone digs too deep or becomes too vocal, they escalate. Escalate how? Depends. Sometimes the person just stops investigating, gets distracted by sudden life changes, new job opportunities, family emergencies. Sometimes they disappear from forums and can't be reached. In extreme cases, they disappear entirely. Identity scrubbed from records. Family and friends lose all memory of them. The implications of that made me feel sick. You're saying they can edit people out of existence? We think so. Same process that changes street names and building colours, just applied to human beings instead of places. But here's what's important. We've never lost anyone who followed proper security protocols and worked within our support network. Phasewalker spent the next hour teaching me basic operational security. Use public Wi-Fi exclusively for forum access. Never search for shift-related terms on personal devices or networks. Vary my travel patterns and avoid predictable routines. Most importantly, document everything offline and in multiple hidden locations. The documentation is crucial, Phasewalker explained. They can alter physical evidence, but they seem to have trouble with distributed, redundant records. If you hide copies of your notes in 10 different places, they might find and alter some of them, but usually not all. Finally, we got to the technical discussion of what we were actually dealing with. The working theory is that we're experiencing timeline convergence events, Phasewalker wrote. Imagine two almost identical realities running parallel to each other. Same basic structure, same historical events, but small differences in details. Street names, building colours, business locations, individual faces. You're saying there are multiple versions of reality? Multiple versions, yes, but usually kept separate by what physicists call quantum decoherence. Think of it like radio stations. They exist simultaneously, but you can only tune into one at a time. Something is causing these reality streams to merge, with one version overwriting the other. What could cause something like that? High-energy particle experiments, electromagnetic anomalies, possibly even certain astronomical events. The forum has been tracking correlations between shifts and activities at research facilities, but the data is incomplete. Phasewalker sent me a file containing maps and timelines of documented reality shifts from around the world. The patterns were striking, events clustered around major universities and research facilities, with timing that suggested coordination or a spreading effect. Phoenix has a major particle physics lab 30 miles south of the city, Phasewalker noted. Every shift event here has occurred within 72 hours of high-energy experiments. Your university district, any major research facilities nearby? I thought about it. The university had a physics department, but I didn't know about major experimental work. However, about 20 miles northwest of the city was Brookhaven Research Institute, a private facility that did contract work for the government. Possibly, I'll need to research it. Be careful how you research it. Don't use normal search engines or library computers. The adjustment teams monitor for certain types of inquiries. We agreed to meet again in 3 days, same time, same protocol. Phasewalker gave me a list of specific things to document: any unusual atmospheric phenomena, timing of changes, geographic patterns, and especially any signs of surveillance. One more thing, Phasewalker added before signing off. If you see a bright flash in the sky followed by low-frequency rumbling, that's the signature of an active shift event. You'll have maybe 6 hours before the changes lock in. That's your window to document everything you can about the pre-shift reality. The next day, I implemented the new security protocols. I found a different coffee shop with public Wi-Fi and spent an hour researching Brookhaven Research Institute. What I found was concerning. Brookhaven specialised in advanced particle physics research with applications for national security. Their website was deliberately vague, but academic papers referenced work on quantum field manipulation and dimensional interface studies. Most significantly, their experimental schedule showed high-energy runs every Tuesday and Friday night between 2 and 5 a.m. Warren Street had become Miller Avenue on a Wednesday morning. The last high-energy run at Brookhaven had been Tuesday night, 2 to 5 a.m. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. On Friday afternoon, I positioned myself in the Miller Avenue area with my notebook and camera, planning to monitor the area through the night. At 11 p.m. I noticed the first watcher. He was sitting in a car parked at the far end of the street, positioned to have a clear view of the entire block. Middle-aged, wearing dark clothes, professional demeanour. He wasn't trying to hide his presence, but he wasn't obvious about surveillance either. At midnight, a second watcher appeared on foot, casually strolling through the area but lingering near streetlights and stopping frequently to check his phone. At 1 a.m, a van with tinted windows parked near the corner intersection. By 2 a.m, there were at least 5 people in the area who seemed to be conducting some kind of coordinated observation. They weren't focused on me specifically. They seemed to be monitoring the entire neighbourhood. At 3:17 a.m, I saw the flash. It started as a bright point of light in the northwestern sky, roughly in the direction of Brookhaven Research Institute. The light expanded rapidly, not like an explosion, but more like a ripple spreading across the sky. For about 3 seconds, the entire northwestern horizon was illuminated with an eerie blue-white glow. Then came the sound, a deep thrumming rumble that seemed to come from underground rather than the sky. It was felt as much as heard, a vibration that made car alarms start going off throughout the neighbourhood. The watchers immediately became more active. I saw them talking into radios and checking devices that looked more sophisticated than cell phones. The van started its engine. I spent the next hour documenting everything I could see in the area, taking photos and writing detailed descriptions. At first, nothing seemed different, but around 5 a.m, I noticed subtle changes beginning to appear. The streetlight on the corner flickered and went out. When it came back on a few minutes later, it was a different style, same height and position, but with a more modern LED fixture instead of the old sodium vapour lamp. The stop sign at the intersection looked slightly different. The red was a shade deeper, and the reflective strips were positioned differently. Most unsettling, when I looked back at photos I'd taken just 2 hours earlier, some of them showed these new versions instead of what I remembered photographing. By dawn, the watchers had disappeared. I drove home, my hands shaking as I realised I had just witnessed a reality shift in progress. That afternoon, I returned to Miller Avenue to document the full extent of the changes. The differences were subtle but consistent. Paint colours slightly different, business signs in new fonts, even the memorial plaque in the park had been altered. The dedication date was now 2011 instead of 2009, and it honoured the Miller Avenue Heritage Preservation Society instead of the Community Garden Group. Most disturbing of all, when I tried to access the photos I had taken during the night, half of them had been automatically corrected by my phone software to match the new reality. My camera had somehow been convinced that it had always photographed the updated version of the neighbourhood. But my handwritten notes remained unchanged. Whatever technology was altering physical evidence couldn't seem to affect ink on paper, at least not immediately. I spent the rest of the week implementing additional security measures and preparing for my next meeting with Phasewalker. I made multiple copies of my notes and hid them in different locations around the city. I bought a second phone that I kept turned off except for emergencies. Most importantly, I started paying attention to my daily routine and varying it randomly. It was a good thing I did. On Wednesday morning, I noticed a car that had been parked outside my apartment building for 3 days straight. Different cars, different people, but always someone maintaining visual surveillance of the building entrance. On Thursday, I received a phone call from someone claiming to be conducting a survey about community memory and local history. The questions were oddly specific about Warren Street and recent changes in the university district. On Friday, I found that my apartment had been searched while I was out. Nothing was missing, but small things had been moved. Books in slightly different positions, papers shuffled, furniture shifted by inches. It was done professionally by someone who wanted me to know they had been there without making it obvious to anyone else. The message was clear. They knew who I was, where I lived, and what I was investigating. That night I packed a bag and left my apartment. I didn't know if or when I would be able to return safely. I spent the next week staying in cheap motels and internet cafes, using different locations each day to access the Forgotten Archive forum. The pattern of surveillance had made it clear that my investigation had moved beyond casual interest. I was now actively being monitored by whoever was behind the reality shifts. Phasewalker had warned me this might happen. Our next scheduled meeting was in encrypted chat room number 7734, but given the escalation in attention, I needed to be extra careful about operational security. I chose a 24-hour internet cafe in a different part of the city, paid cash, and used a computer terminal in the back corner where I could see anyone approaching. At exactly 11 p.m, I logged into the chat room. Phasewalker was already waiting. Night driver, confirm status. Are you still operating freely? Apartment compromised. Living mobile for now. Witnessed active shift event Tuesday night. Documentation successful, but photos were retroactively altered. Confirmed pattern. They're escalating because you're documenting real-time changes. That makes you a priority target, but it also means you've seen something very few people have witnessed directly. I described the flash in the sky, the rumbling sound, and the gradual transformation of the neighbourhood over the following hours. Phasewalker seemed particularly interested in the timing and the electromagnetic effects. The 6-hour lag between the flash and full manifestation is consistent with other observations, Phasewalker typed. We think that's how long it takes for the quantum decoherence field to fully stabilise. During those 6 hours, reality is basically in flux. Some people see the old version, some see the new, some see both overlapping. What about the retroactive changes to photographs? Quantum field effects can alter magnetic storage and digital memory. That's why we rely on handwritten documentation, and physical photographs when possible. The analogue formats seem more resistant to alteration. Phasewalker sent me a file that made my skin crawl. It was a detailed map of my city with a grid overlay, marking predicted locations for future reality shifts. We've been tracking the pattern for 8 months now, Phasewalker explained. The shifts aren't random. They follow a systematic grid pattern radiating outward from specific central points, usually research facilities or locations with unusual electromagnetic properties. The map showed Brookhaven Research Institute at the centre of concentric circles, with predicted shift zones marked at regular intervals. The university district where I had witnessed the Warren Street change was in the second ring. According to the projection, the next affected area would be the downtown financial district, approximately 3 miles southeast of Brookhaven. When? I typed. If the pattern holds, next Tuesday night. The high-energy experiments at Brookhaven run on a regular schedule, and each cycle seems to push the effect field a little further outward. I studied the map more carefully. The grid was precise, almost mechanical in its layout. Each shift zone was approximately the same size, roughly 6 city blocks in a square pattern. Within each zone, the changes appeared to follow consistent rules. Same basic infrastructure, but with details altered in systematic ways. This looks like a spreading wave pattern, I observed. Exactly. Like ripples in a pond, but moving through dimensional space instead of water. Each experimental cycle at Brookhaven creates another pulse, and each pulse pushes the effect boundary a little further out. Phasewalker sent me additional files, documentation from other cities where similar patterns had been observed. Phoenix, Seattle, Austin, Atlanta, all had research facilities at the centre of expanding grids of reality shifts. Is this coordinated? Are all these facilities working together? We don't know. Could be coordinated, could be that multiple groups are working on similar technology and creating interference patterns. What we do know is that it's accelerating. The time between shift events is getting shorter, and the affected areas are getting larger. The implications were staggering. If the pattern continued, eventually the entire metropolitan area would be affected. Millions of people would wake up one day in a slightly different version of their own city, with most of them never realising anything had changed. Why don't more people notice? I asked. Most people don't pay attention to small details. If your street sign changes colour or a building gets painted a different shade, do you really notice? Even if you do, you assume there's a mundane explanation, routine maintenance, normal updates. The human brain is remarkably good at rationalising small inconsistencies. But some people do notice. About 1 in 1,000, based on our estimates. Usually people with strong observational skills or particular attention to detail. Night shift workers see it more often, probably because they're more aware of their environment during quiet hours. Phasewalker sent me detailed instructions for documenting the predicted shift in the financial district. The key was to be in position before the experimental window, document the pre-shift state thoroughly, then track changes in real time during the 6-hour transformation period. This is dangerous, Phasewalker warned. If you're caught in an active shift zone during the transition, there can be complications. What kind of complications? People have reported disorientation, memory confusion, in extreme cases temporary existence in both realities simultaneously. One observer in Seattle claimed to spend 3 hours in a version of the city where she had never been born. She could see her apartment, but strangers were living there, and no one recognised her name. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine what that would feel like, being erased from your own life, even temporarily. There's something else, Phasewalker continued. The Forum has been tracking missing persons reports in areas that have experienced multiple shift events. The numbers are statistically significant. People don't just disappear from records. They disappear from reality entirely. How many people? Hard to get exact numbers because of the nature of the disappearances, but we estimate between 50 and 100 people nationwide over the past year. All of them were either active observers or people who had been asking questions about reality shifts. I thought about the disappeared observers thread on the forum and the reports of people who had simply stopped existing. If Phasewalker was right, I was not just investigating a strange phenomenon, I was documenting what amounted to a systematic alteration of reality that was claiming human casualties. Why are you telling me this? Wouldn't it be safer for me to just stop investigating? Because stopping doesn't seem to protect people once they've been flagged, and because we need documentation of real-time shifts if we're ever going to understand how to stop this process. Stop it? You think it can be stopped? We have to believe it can be, because if it can't, eventually there won't be anyone left who remembers what the world was supposed to look like. We arranged to meet again after the predicted financial district shift. Phasewalker would monitor from Phoenix while I documented locally, and we would compare observations to refine the prediction model. Before signing off, Phasewalker gave me one final piece of advice. If you're going to do this, you need to accept that you might not be able to return to your normal life. Once you've seen reality change in real time, once you've documented evidence of systematic alteration, you become part of a very small group of people who know what's really happening. That knowledge comes with a price. I logged off and sat in the internet cafe for a long time, staring at the map of predicted shift zones. My apartment was in the 5th ring out from Brookhaven. If the pattern continued, my own neighbourhood would be affected within a few months. I could try to return to my normal life, pretend I'd never noticed anything unusual, hope that ignorance would protect me. But I had already seen too much, asked too many questions, attracted too much attention, and somewhere in the back of my mind a terrible thought was forming. What if this had happened before? What if the reality I thought of as normal was actually the result of previous shift events, and I was just now becoming aware of an ongoing process that had been altering the world for years? What if the life I remembered was already gone, and I was just a memory island floating in someone else's version of reality? The financial district shift was scheduled for Tuesday night, but on Monday afternoon I received an encrypted message through the forum's private messaging system. It wasn't from Phase Walker. The sender was identified as Dr_Cassandra_Mills, with a verification code I didn't recognise. Night Driver, I know you don't know me, but I've been following your documentation work through mutual contacts. I have information about the source of the reality shifts that could help your investigation. If you're willing to meet in person, I can explain what's really happening and why. I understand the risks of face-to-face contact, but some things can't be communicated safely through digital channels. The message included detailed instructions for a meeting location, a 24-hour diner in an industrial area about 15 miles from downtown, and specific security protocols. The sender claimed to be a former researcher at Brookhaven Institute who had left the project after discovering the true scope of what they were attempting. Every instinct told me this was dangerous. Phase Walker had warned me about trusting unknown contacts, and meeting someone in person violated every security protocol I had learned. But the possibility of getting inside information about Brookhaven was too valuable to ignore. I spent Monday night researching the meeting location and planning multiple escape routes. The diner was isolated but had good visibility in all directions. There were several ways to approach and leave the area without being trapped. Most importantly, it was far enough from Brookhaven that it shouldn't be affected by Tuesday night's predicted shift event. At 2 a.m. Tuesday morning, I drove to the meeting location. The diner was exactly as described. A classic 1950s-style establishment that looked like it catered to truck drivers and late-shift workers. I arrived 30 minutes early and positioned myself at a corner booth where I could watch both the entrance and the parking lot. At exactly 2:30 a.m, a woman in her 40s entered the diner. She was tall, with greying brown hair and the kind of intense, intelligent eyes that suggested an academic background. She looked around the restaurant carefully before approaching my table. "You must be the rideshare driver," she said quietly. "I'm Cassandra Mills. Thank you for coming." She sat across from me and immediately began speaking in low, urgent tones. "I need to start by telling you that everything you've observed is real, but it's not what you think it is. The reality shifts aren't accidental side effects of particle physics experiments. They're the entire point of the project." "What do you mean?" "Brookhaven Institute isn't conducting pure research. They're working on a contract for a consortium of government agencies and private organisations. The goal is to develop technology for what they call reality optimization." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. Reality optimization? Think of it as editing history on a small scale. Imagine being able to change inconvenient facts, remove evidence of mistakes, alter public memory of events. The applications for intelligence agencies and corporations are obvious. She pulled out a tablet and showed me documents that looked like technical specifications and project timelines. I couldn't verify their authenticity, but the level of detail was impressive. "The technology works by manipulating quantum decoherence fields," she explained. "In simple terms, we're forcing reality to choose between multiple possible versions of the same location or event. The version that gets selected depends on parameters we input into the quantum field generator." "You're saying this is deliberate?" "Someone is choosing what changes." "Exactly. Each experimental run at Brookhaven isn't testing the technology, it's implementing specific changes requested by clients. Warren Street became Miller Avenue because someone wanted that change made. But why? What's the point of changing a random street name? It's not random. Every change serves a purpose, usually to alter or obscure some piece of evidence or memory. Maybe there was a crime on Warren Street that someone wanted forgotten. Maybe a business or political deal that needed to be erased from public record. The street name change forces all the associated records and memories to be updated." She showed me more documents, project files with client codes and change specifications. I saw references to memory revision protocols and evidence nullification procedures. "The process has limitations," Cassandra continued. "It can only alter small areas at a time, and it works best on details that people don't pay close attention to. But the technology is improving rapidly. Early tests could only change things like paint colours and sign fonts. Now they can alter entire buildings and create false histories going back decades. What about the people who remember the original versions? Most people's memories are automatically adjusted along with the physical changes, but about 1 in 1,000 individuals seem to be resistant to the memory revision effect. You're what we call a persistent observer, someone whose brain maintains quantum coherence at a level that resists the alteration field. And that's why I'm being watched. Persistent observers are a problem for the project. If too many people notice the changes and start comparing notes, it could expose the entire operation. So there are protocols for dealing with observers: surveillance, evidence removal, and if necessary, more direct intervention. Direct intervention? Cassandra's expression became grim. The same technology that can edit buildings out of reality can be applied to people. Remove someone from the quantum field entirely, and it's as if they never existed. No body, no crime scene, no investigation, because no one remembers there was ever a person to disappear. The implications hit me like a physical blow. How many people? I don't have exact numbers, but I know it's been used at least a dozen times since the project became operational, always on persistent observers who are getting too close to the truth. Why are you telling me this? Why risk meeting me? Because I helped design this technology, and I need to live with what it's being used for. When I agreed to work on quantum field manipulation, I thought we were developing tools for scientific research. I didn't know it would be used to erase people from existence. She handed me a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. This is a quantum field detector. It can sense reality distortions up to 6 hours before they manifest. It will also alert you if you're being targeted for direct intervention. Targeted how? If someone initiates an erasure protocol on you, the device will give you approximately 30 minutes warning. That's how long it takes to calibrate the field for a specific target. It might be enough time to get out of range. Out of range of what? The erasure field has a limited radius, about 2 miles from the generation source. If you can get outside that perimeter before the protocol completes, you should be safe. I looked at the device, trying to understand what she was telling me. You're saying if I stay more than 2 miles away from Brookhaven, they can't erase me? From the main facility, yes, but they have mobile units for field work, smaller generators that can be deployed anywhere, with a range of about half a mile. How do I know if a mobile unit is targeting me? The detector will show you the direction and approximate distance to any active quantum field source. If you see a mobile signature approaching your location, you need to move immediately. Cassandra glanced at her watch. I have to go. The financial district shift is scheduled to begin in 4 hours, and I need to be somewhere with an alibi when it happens. Wait, you said each change serves a specific purpose. What's being hidden in the financial district? I don't know the details, but the client code suggests it's related to banking records, probably erasing evidence of some financial irregularity or illegal transaction. After tonight, certain buildings, businesses, or records will no longer exist, and no one will remember they ever did. She stood up to leave, then turned back one more time. One more thing. The project is expanding rapidly. The current schedule has shift events planned for 3 more cities this month, and the frequency is increasing. They're not just hiding individual crimes or mistakes anymore. I think they're preparing for something much larger. Like what? Like editing recent history on a massive scale. Think about what you could accomplish if you could make entire events disappear from public memory. Elections, scandals, wars, anything that someone wanted to undo. After she left, I sat in the diner for another hour, trying to process what I had learned. If Cassandra was telling the truth, I wasn't just investigating a strange phenomenon, I was documenting a secret war against reality itself. The quantum field detector remained silent until I started driving back toward the city. Then, at 6:47 a.m., it began beeping softly. I looked at the display and saw a distance reading, 2.3 miles, decreasing. A mobile unit was approaching my location. I pressed the accelerator and drove as fast as I dared, watching the distance reading gradually increase as I put space between myself and whatever was hunting me. The device didn't stop beeping until I was more than 5 miles away from the city centre. For the first time since this all began, I understood exactly how much danger I was in The quantum field detector that Cassandra had given me became my constant companion over the next 3 days. It remained mostly quiet, but twice I had to quickly change locations when it detected mobile field sources approaching. The cat and mouse game was exhausting, but it also gave me valuable information about how the erasure teams operated. They seemed to work in predictable patterns, sweeping through areas where I had been seen, checking locations where I might seek shelter. More importantly, they appeared to have limitations. The mobile units couldn't maintain their quantum fields indefinitely, and they needed several hours to recharge between deployment attempts. I used this window to document the financial district shift from a safe distance. Just as Phase Walker had predicted, the event occurred at 3:33 a.m. on Tuesday night. I watched from a parking garage 4 miles away as the familiar blue-white flash illuminated the sky, followed by the deep rumbling that seemed to come from underground. Over the next 6 hours, I used telephoto lenses to observe the gradual transformation of the downtown area. Buildings shifted colour, signs changed fonts, and at least one entire block seemed to be restructured with different architectural styles. By dawn, the financial district looked subtly but comprehensively different. More disturbing, when I checked news websites and social media the next day, I found reports of a minor earthquake that had supposedly occurred at the same time as the flash. Seismologists were quoted as saying it was a rare but harmless tectonic adjustment. The official narrative was already being established to explain away what people had observed. On Thursday afternoon, the quantum field detector started behaving erratically. Instead of the steady readings I had grown accustomed to, it began showing multiple field sources scattered throughout the city. The display looked like a radar screen during a storm, dozens of mobile signals moving in coordinated patterns. I realised they weren't hunting me individually anymore. They were conducting a systematic sweep of the entire metropolitan area. That evening I received one final message through the forum's encrypted system. It was from Phase Walker. Major escalation detected in multiple cities. Grid pattern acceleration confirmed. They're moving to Phase 2. Final convergence predicted for your location. Saturday night, 3:33 a.m. This is not a normal shift event. Recommend immediate evacuation beyond 50-mile radius. I tried to respond, but the forum was no longer accessible. When I attempted to reach any of the Forgotten Archive servers, I received only error messages. It was as if the entire network had been taken offline. The quantum field detector showed the reason why. Field sources were now active at locations throughout the city, including several positions that surrounded the internet cafe, where I was trying to access the forum. They weren't just hunting persistent observers anymore, they were systematically suppressing all communication channels that could be used to coordinate resistance. I spent Thursday night driving aimlessly through the outer suburbs, staying ahead of the mobile units while trying to understand what final convergence might mean. The detector showed an increasingly dense network of field sources, all of them moving in perfect coordination towards some kind of centralized pattern. By Friday morning I understood what they were planning. Instead of the usual isolated shift affecting a few city blocks, they were preparing to alter the entire metropolitan area simultaneously. Every mobile unit, every field generator, every piece of quantum manipulation technology they had was being positioned for a coordinated reality revision on a scale I had never imagined possible. But what were they trying to hide that would require editing an entire city? The answer came to me while I was studying a map of the field source positions. The pattern wasn't random. The mobile units were positioned at specific locations throughout the city, locations that corresponded to government buildings, research facilities, major corporate headquarters, and media centres. They weren't hiding evidence of individual crimes. They were preparing to erase something that had left traces throughout the entire power structure of the city. Something big enough that removing all evidence of it required changing the reality of 3 million people simultaneously. Friday night, I positioned myself on a hilltop 20 miles outside the city limits, well beyond the range of any quantum field technology I knew about. The detector showed the massive build-up of field sources throughout the metropolitan area, all synchronized for simultaneous activation. At exactly 3:33 a.m. on Saturday, the sky above the city exploded with light. It wasn't the localized flash I had seen during previous shift events. the entire horizon lit up with brilliant blue-white radiance that lasted for nearly 30 seconds. The rumbling that followed was so intense I could feel it through the ground, even at my distance. Then, as I watched through binoculars, the city began to change. Not gradually as I had observed before, but rapidly and comprehensively. Buildings flickered between different versions of themselves. Entire blocks shifted layout and architectural style. The skyline itself was being rewritten in real time, but something went wrong. About 10 minutes into the process, the light began to flicker irregularly. The smooth transformation became chaotic, with buildings and streets oscillating between multiple possible versions. The quantum field detector was screaming with alarms as it registered massive instabilities in the reality distortion grid. Through my binoculars, I could see people in the streets, wandering in obvious confusion. Some appeared to be experiencing multiple overlapping realities simultaneously, stopping and starting as they navigated spaces that were changing around them faster than their minds could process. At 4:15 a.m. there was a final blinding flash, followed by complete darkness. When my vision cleared, the city looked normal again, but not the same normal I remembered. The skyline was subtly different. Buildings I had known for years were gone, replaced by structures in completely different architectural styles. The highway system had been rerouted. Even the geographical features looked wrong. Hills in different positions, the river following a slightly altered course. I tried to use my phone to call someone, anyone, to see if they remembered the old version of the city. But when I checked my contacts list, it was empty. When I tried to dial my sister's number from memory, the recording said it had never been assigned. Worse, when I checked my driver's license, my own name was spelled differently. Not dramatically, just one letter changed, but enough to make me question my own identity. I drove back toward what used to be my neighbourhood, but the streets were laid out differently. Where my apartment building should have been, there was a small park with a memorial plaque dated 1987, dedicating the space to those lost in the Great Reconstruction. I found a motel and spent the next several hours trying to access any information about what the city had been like before the final convergence. Every internet search, every historical record, every photograph showed the new version, as if it had always existed. The quantum field detector had gone silent. When I examined it more closely, I realised it was no longer functional. The massive field convergence had apparently burned out its sensors. On Sunday morning, I drove to where Brookhaven Research Institute should have been. I found an empty field with a historical marker indicating that the land had been preserved as a natural habitat since 1962. There was no sign that any research facility had ever existed there. I tried calling the number Cassandra had given me for emergency contact. The line was disconnected. When I searched for any record of Dr. Cassandra Mills, I found nothing. No employment history, no academic publications, no evidence that she had ever existed. By Sunday evening, I realised the terrible scope of what had happened. They hadn't just hidden evidence of some scandal or crime. They had rewritten the entire history of the city, creating a version of reality where their project had never existed at all. It's been 6 months since the final convergence, and I've learned to navigate this version of the city that wears my home's face but doesn't quite fit. The streets have familiar names but wrong layouts. The landmarks exist in different locations. The people I thought I knew have different histories, different personalities, sometimes different faces entirely. I tried to return to work, but the rideshare company has no record of my employment. My bank account exists, but with a different balance and a transaction history I don't recognise. My apartment building exists, but strangers live in what used to be my unit, and the landlord insists no one by my name has ever rented there. I found a few other persistent observers, people who, like me, retained memories of the pre-convergence reality. We meet occasionally in carefully chosen locations, sharing stories and comparing notes about what used to be. But we're careful. Even in this edited reality, we suspect that asking too many questions about the old world might still attract unwanted attention. The Forgotten Archive forum is gone completely, not just offline, but removed from internet history as if it never existed. The search terms that used to lead to discussions of reality shifts, now produce only academic papers about memory disorders and psychological delusions. I've tried to document what I remember of the original reality, writing everything down in multiple notebooks that I hide in different locations. But sometimes, when I check on them, I find that my own handwriting has changed subtly. Words altered, details modified, as if the editing process is still ongoing even now. The quantum field detector sits on my desk, permanently dead. Sometimes I wonder if Cassandra Mills was real, or if she was just another persistent observer like me who got erased when they cleaned up the loose ends. Maybe our entire conversation was a dream, or a hallucination brought on by exposure to reality distortion fields. But I don't think so. I remember her face too clearly, remember the weight of the device when she handed it to me, remember the specific technical details she shared about the quantum field technology. I think she was real, and I think she sacrificed herself to give me a warning that I couldn't fully understand until it was too late. Yesterday I drove to the hilltop where I watched the final convergence. There's a scenic overlook there now, with a plaque commemorating the site as a natural viewing area preserved since 1923. But when I stood in the exact spot where I had witnessed the city being rewritten, I could swear I saw something that shouldn't have been there. For just a moment, in the corner of my vision, the skyline flickered. For less than a second, I saw the old version of the city, the buildings I remembered, the highway system I had driven for years, the landscape that matched my mental map of home. Then it was gone, and I was looking at this new version that everyone else believes has always been there. I don't know if what I saw was real or just my mind's desperate attempt to hold on to memories that are being systematically erased. But it gives me hope that somewhere, somehow, the original reality still exists. Maybe that's all I can do now, remember what was, and hope that memory itself is enough to keep the truth alive, even in a world that's been edited to deny it ever existed. I think Warren Street was just the first stitch to tear. Whatever world I came from, it's gone, and this one doesn't want me here. But I'm still here anyway, carrying the ghost of a reality that only a few dozen people remember. And as long as we remember, maybe it's not entirely lost. Maybe remembering is enough. Maybe remembering is all we have left. Welcome to Sleep Theories, where we explore the stories that keep you awake at night. Before we dive into today's tale, I want to thank Todd Rockwell 3470 for suggesting this chilling narrative. If you have ideas for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoy these dark tales, don't forget to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more content that will make you question everything you think you know about our world. I took the contract because I needed quiet work and steady pay. The history department at a small European university had secured a preservation grant and needed someone to digitize boxes of neglected materials in a former monastery now used as storage. My task was simple: scan, catalogue and label. I lived by file names and checksum logs. If a page had a fold, I flattened it with a clean bone folder. If a binding cracked, I logged it for conservation. The job had rhythm and no one interrupted me. The basement sat below a chapel converted into a lecture hall. The stones were uneven and cool even in summer. The air smelled of old glue, linen fibres and iron. Fluorescent lights hummed with a pitch that faded into the background if I kept the microfilm reader running. On the second week I started working through a set of wooden stacks pushed against the south wall. The shelving had been there for decades, full of municipal ledgers, nautical charts and ecclesiastical correspondence. Most of it was dull. Dates, tithes, a survey of wheat stores during a winter no one now remembered. I shifted a tool unit to access a mislabeled crate and heard metal scrapestone. The shelf wobbled. Dust rose in a grey sheet. Behind it, a rectangle of wall looked wrong. The paint colour was slightly off from the rest of the lime wash. I knelt and tapped. The sound was hollow. Someone had built a shallow recess and covered it with a thin panel long ago. There were 2 sunken iron loops along the edge. I eased my fingertips under a loop and pulled. The panel stuck, then came away all at once, and a cascade of grit pattered onto the floor. Inside the cavity sat a small chest no wider than my shoulders. Iron straps curved over dark wood that had gone almost black with age. The lock plate was corroded to a dull green. I lifted the chest onto a table and brushed away the dust with a soft brush. As the grime cleared, an emblem appeared on the lid. A single rose pierced by a cross, engraved with care and filled with reddish pigment that had faded but not vanished. Below the emblem a date was incised in neat numerals, 1617. There was no key. The lock looked fragile enough to surrender to patience rather than force. I used a thin brass probe from the conservation kit, working the mechanism until the brittle spring inside surrendered with a small click. The lid stuck along the seal, then gave way. The hinges groaned. I inhaled the first trace of air trapped inside for centuries. Parchment, iron gall ink, beeswax. It was the scent of a time capsule. Inside lay a stack of folded manuscripts bound with linen ties and 2 small leather folders. Each bundle was marked with that same rose and cross sign, and a short label in a steady humanist hand. The top folio read, Nuptia Chimici. Beneath it, another label read, Colloquia de Reformatione. A loose sheet rested on top like a cover letter. The script flowed across the page with deliberate elegance. In the upper left corner, Anno 1617. The first line named a printer in Kassel who would publish a strange allegory that year about a figure called Christian Rosenkreuz. The second line asked whoever found these pages to guard them from unworthy eyes. The leather folders held sealed letters. Each seal bore a wax imprint of the same emblem. One envelope had a note written across the fold in Latin, warning that this message was to be opened only when an age of brass attempted to call itself an age of light. Another envelope held a mapped diagram of 7 stars, a set of angles, and coordinates written in a mixture of numbers and astrological glyphs. The paper crackled when handled. I moved slowly and took high-resolution photos before touching anything else. The next folio was stranger. It looked like a record of conversations among several learned men who met in private rooms at night. They discussed metals, medicines, and the reformation of the arts. They spoke of a brotherhood that would not rule but would guide, not conquer but correct. Their language mixed scripture, geometry, and laboratory notes. Paragraphs ended in short, cryptic maxims, many underlined in faint red. In the margins of one page, a later hand had added a date in pencil, 1909. Someone had consulted these papers in the last century and left a ghost of graphite dust as proof. I set a magnifier over a particularly dense page. The phrase that stood out was simple and cold. Tertia Reformatio, a third reformation, not only of theology, but of governance, knowledge, and energy. The line that followed was worse. It shall begin when the world speaks to itself at once, and when invisible fires are carried in the hands of children. I stared at that sentence longer than I needed to. The interpretation was not difficult. A time when the world's voices merge into a single channel. A time when devices carry immaterial power and communication like bottled lightning. If it was allegory, it was precise. At the bottom of that folio, a small annotation appeared in a different ink. The span completes in the first third of the 21st century. There were no further details on that page. The next sheet offered a table of years, planetary conjunctions, and a set of initials. Some initials had been scraped away with a knife. Tiny curls of parchment lifted at those scars. The remaining marks hinted at a chain of hands extending across 400 years. Printers, patrons, collectors, and custodians. The names were incomplete, but the pattern suggested design. not accident. I photographed everything. For delicate items, I used angled LED lighting to capture the texture of the ink and the slight sheen of the parchment sizing. I logged each image by shelf mark I invented on the spot, then mirrored the files to 2 external drives. My process was rigid because the content felt anything but. The more I turned pages, the more this collection read like a map hidden in plain sight. Ritual language masked technical instructions. Alchemical recipes paralleled procedures I had seen in 19th century chemistry notebooks. The diagrams were not ornamental. They looked like apparatus schematics. Near the end of the first bundle, I found a letter that did not match the rest. The paper was thinner and the watermark was different. The handwriting was still early 17th century, but the tone was urgent, not ceremonial. It warned that a movement had begun and that counter-movements would follow. It spoke of false lights, counterfeit reforms, and trials by scarcity. It counselled patience. It predicted a final alignment in which the old world would appear to crack from within, and a new order of knowledge would be offered as relief. The writer had signed with a symbol, not a name, and added a line that looked like a test of the reader's understanding. The true fire is cold and is carried in silence. I read that line again. It felt like a riddle you only solve after you have passed by it. I looked back at the chest. The interior compartments were cleverly made. Under the lower bundle of folios sat a shallow false bottom that lifted when pressed along a seam. Beneath it lay a folded map. It showed a cross formed by cities, connected by lines at specific angles. Some towns were small in the 17th century but now were major hubs. At each point a symbol marked a specific building or square. It was not decorative, it was a plan. I lowered the map and carefully replaced it between acid-free sheets. The hum of the fluorescence seemed louder. I checked the time. 9:30. Upstairs the building was empty. My phone had only one bar in the basement. I took one more pass through the photos to confirm everything had saved. Then I tied the bundles with their linen cords, closed the chest, and set it in a steel cabinet with a temporary lock. I logged the discovery in my private notebook, but did not enter it into the shared spreadsheet. Not yet. When I climbed the stairs to the ground floor, the chapel hall was lit only by the blue security lights near the exit doors. The stained glass washed the stone with patches of colour. I paused at the threshold and told myself I would show the find to my supervisor in the morning, log it properly, and let institutional processes do their work. As I reached for the latch, I realised I had not decided one basic thing: whether the world was better off not knowing what slept under that wall panel. The doubt followed me out into the night. I arrived early with a plan: catalogue the chest, photograph each page in better light, have Professor Klein witness the accession so the discovery would exist in the system, not just in my notes and mirrored drives. I rehearsed the conversation in the hallway as I keyed into the basement. The night's doubt felt smaller in daylight. A formal chain of custody would keep me honest and keep the material safe. The steel cabinet door opened without resistance. The chest sat inside where I had left it, linen cords tied, bundles nested exactly as before. I checked the drives. Both had verified. I placed the chest on a rolling cart padded with foam and wheeled it toward the elevator, avoiding the tile crack that always jolted the wheels. The 4th floor smelled like coffee and photocopier toner. I pushed the cart down the corridor toward the small suite of offices that housed the department. Klein kept his door open during office hours, closed it only when writing or on calls. Today it stood ajar. I tapped the frame with a knuckle and stepped inside. The room was wrong before my mind supplied the labels for what was missing. No framed diplomas, no shelves crammed with conference proceedings and marginalia, no stack of student essays waiting for comments. The desk sat bare except for a university-issued computer, cables coiled neatly on the surface, power brick wrapped tight with a rubber band. The bookcases were empty. A rectangle of paint on the wall showed where a map had hung for years. The brass lamp that threw warm light over his manuscripts was gone. I checked the hallway. A graduate assistant passed with an armful of journals. "Is Klein in?" I asked. She glanced toward the room as if seeing it for the first time. "He cleared out last night," she said. "That is what they said." "Who said?" "Facilities," she answered. already shifting the stack in her arms. They were moving boxes when I left. Thought it was archives, guess not. I wheeled the cart to the reception desk. The department secretary looked up from her screen. "Can I help you?" "I need to log a discovery with Professor Klein. He's supervising the grant." Her expression tightened in a way that signalled she had repeated a sentence several times already that morning. "Klein is no longer with the university." The words landed with a dull weight. "As of when?" "Effective immediately," she said. "An announcement will be sent to the faculty list. For now, direct all grant-related matters to Interim Chair Halverson." I swallowed the next question because the answer would only be a shrug. I looked down the corridor to the glass case that displayed past faculty monographs and student prizes. The placard outside Klein's office had already been removed. The adhesive square on the wall shone faintly in the light. I pushed the cart back into the hallway and stood still until the buzzing of the fluorescent tubes filled my ears. The chest on the foam pad looked like a prop from a period drama. I wished, briefly and irrationally, that it were empty. I told myself to find Halverson, get a signature, keep moving. I turned left toward the chair's office and my phone vibrated in my pocket. No contact name, a university relay address with a string of numbers. The subject line was blank. The body contained one line. "They know what you found. Stop before it is too late." No greeting, no footer, no signature. I waited for a follow-up that did not arrive. I looked up and down the hallway as if the author stood there watching. My palms felt slick. I slid the phone into airplane mode and took a breath that steadied my hands enough to keep the cart moving. The chair's assistant told me Halverson was at a committee meeting until noon. I thanked her, backed away, and steered the cart into the reading room where graduate students transcribed microfilm. The room had cameras in the corners. Everyone pretended not to notice them. I did not want the chest on display any longer than necessary. I locked it in a side cabinet, signed into a public terminal, and checked the faculty directory. Klein's profile had been removed. The cached version still loaded if I clicked back through the search engine snapshot from 2 days ago. Title, publications, office hours, a lecture scheduled for next month. None of it existed anymore. I opened the email again and examined the headers. The relay masked the origin, but the timestamp showed it had arrived 2 minutes after I keyed into the 4th floor. I looked at the ceiling cameras. I wondered how many feeds watched our building and how many watchers sat behind them. I walked back to the basement to think without eyes on me. The chilled air steadied my pulse. I pulled a stool to the workbench and ran through a simple inventory in my notebook to keep my mind from looping. Chest. Contents intact. Photos complete. Witness absent. Chain of custody incomplete. Unexpected message. Supervisor departed without notice. The situation needed fewer variables. I considered contacting the grant administrator. Sensible, if I wanted to invite auditors and campus security into the room within the hour. I considered taking a full duplicate set of images off-site. Sensible, if I wanted to escalate a situation I did not yet understand. I compromised by generating encrypted archives of both drive mirrors. While they processed, I returned to the chest, untied the cords, and lifted one leather folder. The letter with the phrase Third Reformation lay where I had placed it between inert, acid-free sheets. I read it again, searching for practical instructions that might hide behind the tone. There were none. Only a discipline. Move slowly, weigh the meaning of symbols, and test claims against the world rather than against anxiety. I exhaled and closed the folder. Near noon I took the elevator back to the chair's office. Halverson stood at the window with a mug, staring across the courtyard at scaffolding on the library facade. He turned when I knocked and studied me with a professional's patience that had a hint of fatigue. "I am working the preservation grant in the basement," I said. "Under Klein's supervision. I need a signature to log a new accession." "Of course," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Klein's departure was unexpected. We will stabilise the projects as quickly as possible. What did you find?" "A locked chest built into a wall panel. 17th century manuscripts with a rose and cross emblem. The date 1617 appears on the lid and in the texts. There are letters and diagrams, Latin, humanist hand, possibly connected to a circle of writers around the Chimical wedding." The words sounded calm in the small office. The mug paused halfway to his mouth. You have them with you? In a secured cabinet downstairs. I wanted to document with a witness before moving anything to special collections. Good, he said, setting the mug down. Let me alert security and special collections. We will do this properly. He picked up the phone. His language was careful. He requested a conservator and a security officer for chain of custody protocol. He did not name the contents. He did not mention Klein. He hung up and scribbled a note on departmental letterhead that authorised temporary custody and transport to the preservation lab. He signed, dated, and initialed each line like a man who had fielded enough disputes to know where they begin. 10 minutes, he said. We will meet you in the basement. I thanked him and left. In the elevator, I turned my phone out of airplane mode and found a second message waiting. Same relay address, same blank subject line. 2 sentences this time. You have already told too many people. The faculty list is watched. Do not let them move the chest. The doors opened on the basement and I stood still with my hand on the cart handle, reading the lines twice, then a third time, as if repetition would make them less plausible. My first thought was simple. It is bait. My second thought followed too quickly to ignore. If someone wanted the chest in motion where it could vanish, this is exactly how they would move it. Footsteps sounded in the stairwell above. Voices. I looked at the cabinet key in my hand, then at the exit door leading to the loading dock. The chest sat 20 metres away behind a steel door that could be opened in 3 seconds. Institutional Process walked toward me from above with clipboards and forms. An anonymous warning told me to freeze the situation or lose control. I rolled the cart toward the cabinet, unlocked it, and stared down at the dark wood and iron straps that had slept behind a wall for centuries. I slid the chest onto the cart, covered it with a foam pad, and pulled a canvas tarp over the top. The decision I made was narrow and exact. I would not move it out of the building, and I would not let it go upstairs until I understood who was waiting. The stairwell door opened. A uniformed guard stepped into the hallway with a conservator in a white lab coat behind him. Halverson followed, speaking in a low voice. I forced my hands to steady. I smiled like a person who had everything in order. I gestured to the cart and the guard nodded, already checking a form against a badge number. Before we transfer, I said, I need to show you something. I reached to the shelf above the workbench and pulled down the leather folder that held the letter about the Third Reformation. I opened to the page with the warning about false lights and counterfeit reforms and placed it under the angled lamp. The conservator leaned in, professional interest overcoming everything else. The guard stayed near the cart, eyes on the tarp. Halverson moved a step closer to the letter, then paused. He was looking not at the parchment, but at the cabinet where the chest had sat a moment earlier. He noticed the empty shelf. His gaze slid to the cart, to the tarp, to my hands on the edge of the foam. He did not speak. The fluorescent hum filled the silence like a faint, steady alarm. I left the basement hours later, after the chest had been formally transferred and sealed by special collections. I let them take it because refusing would have turned suspicion into certainty. The receipt sat in my pocket with 3 signatures and a timestamp. On paper, the chest was safe. In my head, I replayed the warning email, convinced that safe was the wrong word. The courtyard outside was sharp with autumn wind. Students crossed in loose knots, unaware that an entire life's work had been erased upstairs overnight. I turned my phone on again and found no new messages. The silence felt heavier than the words had. I walked toward the tram stop, intending to go home and sleep, but my body carried me past it and into the narrow streets of the old quarter. I wanted space to think without cameras in the corners of the ceiling. Here the cobbles were uneven, and the buildings leaned as if the centuries had taught them to share weight. I stopped in front of a church that had stood since the 15th century, and stared at the stonework. There it was, the same rose and cross emblem carved into a corner block halfway up the bell tower. Not big, not meant to be seen from the street. Weather had worn it down to a shallow relief, but the lines were unmistakable. The cross had equal arms, the rose sat perfectly centred, petals outlined in simple geometry. I stepped closer. Around the emblem ran a border of Latin words, abbreviated, hard to read where rain had eaten the limestone. I took a picture with my phone, angled to catch the last light. The phrase resolved slowly as I traced it with my finger. In tenebris lucet, it shines in darkness. I circled the church, finding 2 more symbols hidden under drainspouts and carved into lintels. Some were older, chipped by centuries. Others looked too sharp, as if recut in recent decades. And at each corner where a symbol appeared, a black dome security camera pointed down. Not the standard municipal kind. These had tinted covers, pan and tilt motors, infrared rings. I followed their line of sight until I stood at the exact centre of the courtyard, where the paving stones formed a cross pattern older than the church itself. That night, back in my apartment, I spread out printouts of the map I had photographed from the chest. The cross formed by European cities spanned thousands of kilometres, yet the proportions matched what I had seen in the courtyard. I marked my own city on the map. The church I had visited sat almost exactly at the intersection of 2 lines. I pulled up a satellite map and began tracing. Each city marked on the 17th century map had a similar church or cathedral at its centre. Around each building, modern infrastructure formed a pattern. Security cameras, municipal sensors, even new paving that followed strange alignments. I slept poorly. The next morning I walked a different route to campus and past a bank I had never used. Its facade was carved with roses arranged in a grid, each rose intersected by a cross. The carvings looked decorative to anyone passing, but I knew the emblem now. Inside the atrium, a mosaic on the floor repeated the pattern in coloured tile. By midday, I had counted 7 sites across the city. 3 churches, 2 bank facades, a courthouse, and a government archive. Each one displayed the same sigil in some form, often placed where no tourist would ever look. The surveillance system bothered me more than the symbols. At every site, the cameras converged toward the emblem, not toward entrances or streets. I stopped at a cafe across from the courthouse and watched for 30 minutes. The cameras rotated on a pattern but always returned to centre on the stone carving above the main doors, as if guarding it. Back in the reading room, I combed through the high-resolution images I had captured of the manuscripts, looking for anything that might explain the geometry. In the margins of one page there was a crude map showing 4 cities connected into a cross, with annotations describing angles and distances. Another page listed astronomical conjunctions paired with terrestrial events, harvests, plagues, wars. The language was cryptic but consistent, the belief that certain places formed a network and that aligning them under specific celestial conditions would produce a harmonic of reformation. The diagrams looked eerily like modern network schematics. The next day, I rented a bicycle and rode to a smaller town on the outskirts that appeared on the map as a nodal point. At the town square, I found a statue of a robed figure holding a book. On the pedestal, nearly hidden behind ivy, was the rose cross symbol, freshly painted in red. I lifted my phone to take a picture. A man sitting on a nearby bench looked up from his newspaper. His expression was neutral but watchful. I lowered the phone and walked to the edge of the square. When I glanced back, he was still watching. I left by a side street, doubling back twice to see if I was followed. No one trailed me, but the sensation clung like static. That evening, I overlaid the 17th century map with the satellite map again, tracing the perfect cross across the continent. Each point had cameras, sensors, and recent renovations that seemed to align with the old geometry. It looked like a centuries-old plan updated with 21st century technology. The following morning, I found an envelope in my apartment mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single printed sheet, a new map, this one marking not just the cities but specific coordinates within them. At the bottom one line, you are seeing only the surface. Keep looking, no signature. I sat on my kitchen floor staring at the page. Whoever had sent it knew where I lived, knew what I had been studying, and wanted me to continue, or wanted me to dig my own grave by digging deeper. The next step was obvious. Find out if these symbols were local oddities or part of something larger. I booked a weekend train ticket to one of the other cities on the map. I told no one. The city was larger, more chaotic, full of tourists, but the pattern repeated. I found a cathedral with a rose-cross motif carved into its western gate, and across the street a cluster of modern surveillance poles all facing inward. At night, under sodium lamps, the arrangement looked deliberate, ritualistic. In the plaza's centre was an old stone marker with Latin text half eroded by time. I bent to read it and felt watched. Not just by cameras this time, but by people. A man in a black coat stood near the fountain. Another leaned on a bicycle by the tram line. Neither moved, but both looked at me with the stillness of someone waiting for a cue. I left the plaza quickly and ducked into a side street, heart pounding, certain I'd been made. Back at the hotel, I locked the door and pulled the curtains. On the desk, I spread the envelope map next to my photos. Every line connected. Every symbol had been placed like a coordinate in a circuit. When I finally shut off the light, one thought kept repeating. These sites were not just historical curiosities. They were part of a system that had been built, rebuilt, and guarded for centuries. And now that I had noticed, someone was making sure I knew I was being noticed too. The next morning I checked out of the hotel early, still uneasy from the plaza encounter. The city streets felt alive in a way they hadn't before, every face a possible watcher. I kept my head down and walked to the train station, scanning for the man with the bicycle, the man near the fountain, anyone familiar. No one followed, or no one obvious did. On the platform I waited until the last moment to board and chose a window seat where I could see the doors. The train lurched forward, carrying me back toward my city. I exhaled only when we cleared the outer suburbs. 3 stops later, a man slid into the empty seat across from me. Mid-40s, hair neat, dark wool coat. He smiled with a kind of politeness that was practiced but not warm. "You've been tracing the cross," he said quietly, as though commenting on the weather. My hand went to my bag reflexively, feeling for the SD card that held every photo I had taken. "I do not know what you mean," I said. "You do," he said, still calm. "And you're not the first to do so. You have questions. I can offer answers, but only if you're willing to listen in the proper place." He held out a small white card. No name, no address, only a date, time, and a set of coordinates. The meeting was that evening, in a district I rarely visited. I turned the card over. A faint watermark of a rose and cross appeared in the fibres. "What if I say no?" I asked. "Then you will go on wondering, and eventually you will stop asking questions altogether. The decision is yours." He stood before I could reply and moved to the next carriage. I stared at the card until the train reached my stop. I debated for hours. Going could be a trap. Not going might leave me forever haunted by what I had already seen. At dusk I took a tram toward the coordinates. The address led to a nondescript building between 2 shuttered shops. A single light burned above a side door. I knocked. The door opened inward with a soft creak. A woman in a plain black coat greeted me with a nod and gestured me inside without a word. The interior was dim and warm, smelling faintly of beeswax and old wood. The hallway ended at a heavy door. Beyond it lay a chamber lit by candles. At the far end stood a long table, where a dozen people sat in silence. The man from the train stepped forward. "Welcome. Sit, and you may hear what few outsiders ever hear." I sat on a plain wooden chair. One of the members, an older man with silver hair, began to speak. His voice was steady, measured, as if he had given this address many times. "The order has endured since the 17th century. We are custodians, not rulers. Our task is to prepare humanity for the next phase. We are nearly at the culmination." He gestured toward a chart pinned to the wall, a diagram of global markets, energy transitions and population curves converging on a single date. March 20th, 2033. "This is the horizon," he said, "the point at which the Third Reformation completes its cycle. The First Reformation broke the old church. The second birthed the age of science. The third will reconcile them both and bring a new dawn." Another member spoke next, describing phase transitions, engineered shifts in economy, energy and governance designed to move humanity from chaos into stability. Crises, he explained, were necessary catalysts. Recessions, conflicts, energy shortages, none random, all guided toward balance. I listened, torn between awe and dread. "What happens in 2033? I asked. The silver-haired man smiled faintly. "A synthesis. The world will no longer be fractured between spirit and matter, faith and reason. There will be a single framework, a single architecture of knowledge. We have been building toward it for centuries." The man from the train placed a small object in front of me, a token engraved with the Rose Cross emblem. "This is an invitation," he said. "You may continue to observe, or you may take a more active role. But once you step beyond observation, there is no way back." The candles hissed softly. The faces around the table watched, not with menace, but with patient expectation. I turned the token in my hand. Its weight felt disproportionate for its size, as if it carried more than metal. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you found what you were meant to find," the silver-haired man said, "and because those who seek without guidance are vulnerable to forces that would twist the truth. We offer protection and understanding." The meeting ended without ceremony. The woman in the black coat led me back to the side door. Outside, the street was empty, the night air sharp. The token felt hot in my pocket. I did not sleep. I played the recording I had made with my concealed microphone. Every word captured clearly. Their voices, their promises, their plans. All there. At dawn, I booked a room at a hotel under a false name and uploaded the recording to a secure drive. Then I bought a second SD card, copied the file, and hid it under the lining of my jacket. If they were telling the truth, I had just listened to history being shaped in real time. If they were lying, then I had stumbled into a performance staged for me alone. Either way, I knew one thing with certainty. Someone would come looking for the recording, and soon. I left the hotel early, the recording still hidden under my jacket. The token sat on the desk, its engraved emblem catching the grey light leaking through the curtains. I hesitated, then pocketed it. If I abandoned it, they might think I had chosen a side. Keeping it might buy me time. The day felt too quiet. I avoided my usual tram stop, walking 3 extra blocks before boarding, and sat near the exit so I could step off quickly. Every reflection in the window looked like a watcher. At the university, I avoided the reading room entirely and went straight to the basement to collect my laptop and field notes. The cabinet had been opened. My notebooks were shredded and dumped in the trash can. The laptop was gone, only the power cable left dangling. My mirrored drives were missing. I stood in the centre of the room, breathing slow, scanning for anything else out of place. The dust near the cabinet door was disturbed, faint shoe prints leading toward the freight elevator. Someone had taken everything, except the SD card under my jacket. I packed the chest receipt, my remaining papers, and a few essentials into a small backpack. I left the building by a side entrance and headed for the train station, staying in sight of crowds whenever possible. The first train out was half empty. I boarded and sat facing the aisle, every muscle coiled, waiting for the sound of hurried steps. None came. An hour into the ride, I saw them. 2 men in dark coats stepping through the carriage door, scanning faces. They moved methodically, row by row. I left my seat, walked toward the restroom, and slipped into the narrow space between carriages as they passed. When the train slowed for the next station, I jumped off before it had stopped moving completely, hitting the platform hard and running toward the station exit. Outside, the air was cold and wet. I ducked into an alley, stripped the SIM card from my phone, and dropped it into a drain. Then I crossed through the side streets until I reached a bus depot and boarded a coach heading toward the border. By nightfall, I was in another country under another name. I paid cash for a cheap room above a tavern and locked the door twice. I uploaded the recording again, this time to multiple servers, and sent the links to an encrypted email account I had set up weeks earlier. Around midnight, the door handle rattled. I froze. The sound came again, a slow turn testing the lock. Then silence. I waited, every muscle tight, until the faint creak of the stairwell told me whoever had tried the handle had gone back down. The next morning I left through the tavern's kitchen exit and took a taxi to the airport. I booked the first flight to a distant city. No checked luggage. no digital trail. At the airport, I caught sight of one of the men from the train standing near security. He scanned the crowd with the calm focus of a professional. I turned sharply, weaving through passengers until I reached a different checkpoint. I boarded the plane with minutes to spare, heart pounding. In the seat pocket, I found an abandoned newspaper. The headline announced an unexpected closure of the university archives due to security concerns. The story mentioned nothing about the chest or Klein's disappearance. Somewhere below me, while the plane climbed through grey clouds, a network of watchers was still closing in. They had taken my notes, my laptop, my drives, but they had not taken the recording. I landed after dark. The city was unfamiliar, its language different, but that was the point. I moved through the terminal as if invisible, boarded a late-night bus to the centre, and found a room in a small hotel with no cameras in the lobby. Only then did I let myself sit still. The token lay in my palm, its edges warm from my skin. On one side, the rose and cross. On the other, a set of numbers, coordinates different from the first set. I traced them onto a page. The location was near the edge of the city, an industrial district. I closed my eyes, exhausted. I told myself I would ignore it, disappear, find a way to vanish into anonymity. But when dawn came, I knew where I would go next. If they wanted me to stop, they would have taken more than paper. They wanted me to see enough to fear them, but I was past fear. I bought a cheap local phone, left it off, and kept walking until the factories rose like grey skeletons on the horizon. Whatever waited for me at those coordinates was either an answer or the end. The coordinates led me to a crumbling factory complex on the edge of the city. Rusted fences, shattered windows, graffiti layered over decades. At first I thought it was abandoned, but as I circled to a side entrance I saw a single light burning inside. I stepped through a gap in the fence and moved quietly along the wall until I found a door hanging from one hinge. Inside, the air was thick with dust and machine oil. I followed the light deeper into the building until I heard footsteps. "Don't be afraid," the voice said. A man stepped from the shadows. His coat was worn, his face lined, his expression wary but not hostile. "You were expected," he said. "I was told to meet you if you came this far." "Who told you?" I asked. "The ones you met in the candlelit hall," he said. "I am not one of them anymore." He gestured for me to follow and led me down a staircase into what had once been a storage cellar. The walls here were reinforced with newer concrete. At the far end stood a table covered with papers, diagrams and strange devices. Copper coils, glass tubes, notebooks full of calculations. "This is what they guard," he said. "The chest you found was one fragment. They have hundreds. Manuscripts, treatises, prototypes. Knowledge passed down from before the industrial age. Knowledge too dangerous to release all at once." He handed me a yellowed page filled with alchemical symbols. In the margin, someone had written annotations in modern German. "This formula," he said, "describes a process for extracting energy directly from the magnetic field of the Earth. No combustion, no fuel. Imagine what that would do to the balance of power if everyone could build it in a garage." Another diagram showed a device resembling a modern MRI machine, but the notes described it as capable of healing cellular damage at a rate far beyond current medicine. "They keep these things hidden," he said, "not to hoard power, but to prevent collapse. Release them too early and entire economies vanish overnight. They believe humanity must be ready first." I thought of the charts on the meeting room wall, the date circled again and again, March 20th, 2033. "That is the readiness date?" I asked. He nodded. "If they stay on schedule. But there are factions. Some want to delay another generation. Others want to accelerate. Crises are their levers. Financial collapses, pandemics, energy shortages. Each one forces society to adapt, to let go of old systems." I picked up a folder labelled Colloquium 2030. Inside were transcripts of meetings planning an emergency transition for the global grid to decentralised energy. The language was clinical, but between the lines was a recognition that millions would suffer in the short term. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because you still have a choice," he said. "You can tell the world what you know, but you will be silenced before you can prove it. Or you can keep watching, documenting, waiting, until the moment they cannot stop the truth from coming out. He handed me a small metal key. This is for a locker at the central station. Inside you will find duplicates of what I have shown you. If I vanish, you must keep them safe. A noise echoed from above, the faint creak of the outer door. The man's face hardened. "They have found us," he said. He shoved the rest of the papers into a steel box and slid it under the table. "Go!" Through the back. There's a stair that leads to the old loading bay. I hesitated. "What about you?" He smiled faintly, almost resigned. "I've run long enough. You are the one who needs to leave." I turned and ran, heart hammering, through a maze of corridors until I found the loading bay. Moonlight spilled through broken windows. I climbed through a gap and sprinted into the night, not stopping until I reached the main road. I caught a taxi back into the city, clutching the key so tightly it cut into my palm. Back at the hotel, I collapsed onto the bed, listening for footsteps in the hallway. None came. At dawn, I took the first tram to the central station and found the locker. Inside was a hard case filled with papers, microfilm reels and a small portable drive. I transferred the contents to a cloud vault, encrypting the files with a passphrase only I knew. When I left the station, the token in my pocket felt heavier than before. The choice I had been offered was no longer theoretical. They had the technology to change everything, and they were waiting for the right moment to use it. I rented a small apartment under another false name, keeping the blinds closed and the lights low at night. The locker key never left my pocket. Each morning I spent hours decoding the manuscripts I had duplicated, cross-referencing them with historical records, energy policy shifts, and economic data from the last 20 years. Patterns emerged. A set of letters from the 18th century predicted the rise of steam power, the consolidation of banking networks, and even the redrawing of national borders after specific wars. Another series of documents listed critical alignments for the 20th century, with notations about global conflicts that matched the timing of both world wars almost to the year. The most disturbing discovery came when I deciphered the last bundle. It contained tables projecting events in the 21st century. The first line matched the global market crash of 2008. The second referenced a plague of the invisible air that would accelerate digital adoption, a line that could only describe the pandemic. But the final table carried a heading that froze me in place: Phase 3 Convergence. It described, in chillingly specific terms, an engineered transition between 2028 and 2033, controlled collapses of outdated energy infrastructure, a rapid introduction of decentralized power sources, and the rise of a unified global regulatory body under the guise of climate response. If these documents were genuine, they were not just describing history, they were shaping it. I printed the translated pages, pinning them to the apartment wall until they formed a timeline stretching back 4 centuries and ending 5 years from now. The further I stepped back, the more it looked like a single piece of design, one long breath drawn in since the year 1617, ready to exhale. I thought of Professor Klein, vanishing overnight, his name erased. Had he been silenced or simply absorbed into the network? One evening I received another envelope under my door. Inside was a single page, a copy of my own timeline, but rewritten in a different hand with a new line at the bottom. March 20th, 2033, completion of the great work. Choice must be made. No threats this time. No warnings to stop. Just that line. I realised then that the emails, the watchers, even the break-ins had been pushing me toward this moment. Not to frighten me away, but to ensure I understood what was coming. The next morning I walked through the city with new eyes. The surveillance cameras no longer looked like threats. They looked like guardians, watching over a plan that had been in motion before my country even existed. At a small cafe, I opened my laptop and began compiling everything into one final document. The photos of the chest, the manuscripts, the translations, the audio recording from the meeting, the papers from the rogue ex-member. When I finished, I encrypted the file and set it to upload to a dozen mirrored servers. A progress bar crawled across the screen. For the first time since the day I moved that shelf in the basement, I felt strangely calm. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an invitation. The upload finished just before sunrise. I closed the laptop and sat in silence as the city outside began to wake. Church bells rang faintly through the morning fog. I half expected a knock at the door before I even stood up. By afternoon the files were gone. Every server returned a 404 error. One site marked the upload as removed for misinformation, another as violating terms of service. My backup still existed locally, but it no longer mattered. Someone had erased them from the public space with precision and speed. That evening there was a sound at the door. A single envelope lay on the floor when I opened it. Heavy paper, sealed in red wax with the Rose and Cross emblem. Inside was a letter, written in the same elegant hand as the manuscripts. You have seen enough to know we are real. You may join us, or you may remain silent. This is your only choice. No threat, no ultimatum, only a decision. At dusk I walked to the oldest district in the city, to a narrow street lined with stone buildings whose foundations were centuries old. At the end stood a structure I had seen marked on the 17th century map, a building whose doors had been closed the entire time I had been here. Tonight they were not closed. The great oak door was slightly ajar, just wide enough for a glow of warm light to spill into the street. I stood there for a long moment, the token in my pocket heavy as lead. I thought of Klein's empty office, the shredded notebooks, the candlelit hall, the man in the abandoned factory handing me the locker key. I thought of March 20th, 2033, 5 years away, and of a plan so vast it had survived kings, revolutions and wars. The door creaked wider on its hinges as if someone inside had been waiting for me. I stepped forward, hand outstretched, and then I stopped, standing on the threshold, staring into the light, deciding whether to enter and learn the final truth, or walk away and keep what I knew locked inside me. The choice was mine.